Try closing your eyes and imagining the entire history of the blue planet we call home. From the moment it was just a lifeless, fiery ball of lava floating in the vast darkness of space to the brilliant world of city lights we see today. All of that brutality, majesty, and wonder is now neatly compressed into exactly one cycle of day and night, 24 hours. Suppose our Earth was officially born at the stroke of midnight, 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. Can you guess at what time the Tyrannosaurus Rex, the icons of power that once spread terror across the continents, would let out their first roar? In the early morning mist, at high noon, or in the late hours of the evening? And the most haunting, biggest question, at what moment during those 24 long hours did the species that calls itself the master of all things, humanity, step onto the stage of history? The truth might just send shivers down your spine. The entire history of human civilization you've ever studied in books, from the time the pharaohs ordered the construction of the towering pyramids of Giza, to the empires that rose and fell, from the brutal world wars that stained the oceans with blood to the moment humanity launched spacecraft toward the stars, and even the very moment you are hearing these words, all of that frantic and massive human legacy has, in fact, unfolded in less than the final tenth of a second of the day. Just a lightning, fast blink of an eye. That is the only space we occupy on the endless scale of the universe. 4.5 billion years is a figure so colossal, so macroscopic that our small human brains cannot fully imagine or digest it. 70 or 80 long years of a human life placed next to the age of the Earth is not even equal to a single grain of sand in the Sahara Desert. Therefore, to truly grasp the magnificence of this planet, today we will establish a new rule. We will compress all 4.5 billion years of Earth's history into a 24-hour countdown clock. According to the ruthless rules of this clock, every hour that passes is equivalent to about 187 million actual years. For every minute you tap your foot, this planet has aged another 3 million years. And with every tick of the second hand, 52,000 years of history flashed by, submerging supercontinents, leveling the greatest mountains, and sweeping away countless lives. On this clock of absolute time, all things become ephemeral. A vast, surging ocean can evaporate into a desert in just a few seconds. Giant creatures that seemed invincible can be completely wiped out after a single sigh. Are you ready to witness the primal violence of nature? Are you ready to face the most surreal miracles of evolution and taste the despair of the most brutal extinctions ever to sweep across this globe? Take a deep breath. Relax your mind and cast aside every concept of time you have ever known. The greatest journey of life back to the dawn of time is about to begin. Welcome to the 24-hour Chronicles of Earth. The clock strikes exactly 0 hours, 0 minutes. The beginning of everything. At this moment, if you could stand in space and look down at where Earth should be, you would not see any deep blue oceans or lush continents. Instead, greeting you is a nightmare sphere, a massive fiery slaughterhouse, suspended in the cold space of the young solar system. Scientists call this the Hadean, a name given after Hades, the god who rules the underworld in Greek mythology. And indeed, no words could more accurately depict Earth at that time. It was a hell on Earth. 4.5 billion years ago, there was no solid ground for you to step on. The entire surface of the planet was a boiling magma ocean churning and surging at temperatures of over 2,000 degrees Celsius. Gravity was doing its violent work, pulling giant rocks and wandering cosmic debris to slam into this molten sphere, releasing terrifying amounts of energy. The sky had no blue. It was a gloomy curtain of dust, toxic sulfur gases, dense carbon dioxide, and steam rising from lava pits. The atmosphere at this time was so heavy and toxic that it could dissolve and crush any living organism in an instant. Earth at 0 hour, 0 minutes was a planet of pure death, a world that rejected all seeds of life. However, the violence of the universe did not stop there. Only about 10 minutes have passed on our clock. It is now 12:10 a.m. An event of apocalyptic proportions is about to take place. A fateful moment that will change the trajectory of this planet's history forever. From the darkness of the vast universe, another wandering planet is hurtling toward Earth at a destructive speed. Astronomers call it Theia, a protoplanet approximately the size of Mars with a diameter of more than 6,000 kilometers. Invisible, but absolutely powerful gravity locked the orbits of these two giant spheres together in an unavoidable dance of death. There was no one there to witness it, no creature to cry out in fear, only the deathly silence of space before the storm. And then the collision occurred, a collision with a horrific, destructive power far beyond all human imagination. The energy released was billions of times greater than the most powerful atomic bomb ever built. The outer layers of both Theia and Earth were immediately vaporized into gas and superheated plasma. The intruding planet, Theia, was torn into battered fragments, while our Earth also nearly shattered completely. Earth's axis was knocked askew, and Theia's heavy iron core sank deep and merged with Earth's core, making our planet's magnetic field eventually strong enough to withstand deadly radiation storms from the sun. From the debris floating in orbit, trillions of tons of molten rock and cosmic dust were flung around Earth, forming a massive fiery ring, looking no different from the beautiful rings of Saturn today. Over time, gravity once again intervened. Over thousands of years, equivalent to just a blink of an eye on the 24-hour clock, the fragments in this ring gradually coalesced, rubbed, melted, and fused together. From the ashes of the greatest destruction, a loyal companion was born. The moon officially appeared. In those early days, the moon was much closer to Earth than it is now. If you looked up at the sky, you would see a giant orb of rock, glowing red with flows of lava, occupying a massive portion of space. And it was the presence of this great satellite that became the savior of Earth. The moon's gravity acts as a giant anchor, keeping our planet's axial tilt stable at 23.5 degrees. Without the violent collision with Theia, without the birth of the moon, Earth would constantly wobble in space. The poles would continuously flip, the climate would vary chaotically, and complex life might never have had the chance to exist. The destruction named Theia, ironically, was the greatest gift the universe bestowed upon us. Our clock continues to count down indifferently, 100 a.m., 200 a.m., then 300 a.m. After the horrific shock, Earth began to enter an era of soothing. The cold space of the universe gradually sucked away the fervent heat of the planet. The churning magma surface began to cool, solidifying into a thin, pitch-black and cracked basalt crust. Giant volcanoes continued to erupt, tearing through the sky with pillars of ash and smoke tens of kilometers high, relentlessly pumping water vapor and greenhouse gases into an increasingly dense atmosphere. Water vapor. That is the most important keyword right now. It was brought by millions of comets and asteroids, bombarding Earth for hundreds of millions of years, or released from the very rocks deep within the planet. Everywhere across the murky sky, giant heavy clouds began to accumulate. The atmosphere was saturated to its limit, and as the clock prepared to strike 400 a.m., Earth's temperature finally dropped below the boiling point of water. The first drop of water in the planet's history condensed and fell onto the scorching rock surface, evaporating instantly. But following that drop was another, then thousands, then billions of drops. The greatest rain in history began to pour down. It was not a storm that lasted for a few days or weeks. This great storm lasted for millions of years without stopping. Water cascaded from the gray sky, drenching the barren volcanic plains, flowing into torrential rivers of mud and minerals, gradually filling giant meteorite craters. 400 AM, about 4 billion years ago, the million-year rain finally ceased. The sky gradually cleared. The planet's surface had completely changed. Hellfire was extinguished, making way for something equally magnificent: the primordial oceans. But don't let that name fool you. This was no idyllic tropical beach. It was a vast expanse of water, deep green or murky brown from the dissolution of so much iron and minerals. The seawater was extremely acidic, and the sky above it was a brilliant orange, red due to the massive concentration of carbon dioxide. Everything was submerged in a gloomy, silent atmosphere, with only the sound of waves rustling against desolate volcanic cliffs. 400 AM passed. Earth had been baptized by water and fire. The stage was set. The harsh but necessary conditions had all converged. In the mysterious silence of that giant primordial ocean, an invisible miracle, the universe's most complex chain of chemical reactions, was silently preparing to be triggered. Life was stirring, knocking on the door of time. The clock struck 400 AM. The sky above remained a thick, gloomy, and toxic orange, red. Acid rain still occasionally poured down onto the desolate ocean surface. At this moment, if you were to glide over the giant pitch, black waves, you would see that Earth still appeared to be a dead planet. Not a single branch or blade of grass, no sign of birds or the growl of wild beasts. Absolute silence enveloped the surface of the world, but do not be discouraged. The universe always knows how to hide its greatest secrets in the darkest places. Let's dive down together. Deep down, thousands of meters to the bottom of the primordial ocean, where sunlight can never penetrate. In this cold abyss under immense pressure, the Earth's crust was cracked open. Frigid seawater seeped through the fissures, touched the fiery magma chambers below, was heated to hundreds of degrees Celsius, and blasted back up. They created black smokers, hydrothermal vents that constantly discharged into the ocean a thick soup, like mixture full of minerals, hydrogen sulfide, iron, and primordial chemical compounds. Right at the fragile boundary between the bone, chilling cold of the seabed, and the furious heat of magma, one of the universe's most surreal miracles quietly took place. Billions upon billions of random chemical reactions collided relentlessly for tens of millions of years. Atoms of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, through some miraculous arrangement of probability, bonded to form the first organic molecules. Then, those molecules curled themselves up, enveloping each other in a thin lipid membrane to separate themselves from the chaotic external environment. And then, boom, an invisible spark of life was lit. A microscopic structure with no eyes, no brain, no limbs, but possessing a power that no rock or mountain could ever have: the ability to self-replicate. The first single-celled organism of Earth was officially born. Every living thing on this planet today, from the giant blue whale and ancient oak tree to you yourself, sitting here listening to these words, all share a single common ancestor originating from that murky black smoker at the bottom of the ocean all those years ago. Our great last universal common ancestor, the clock of time, still coldly ticks each beat. 500 AM, 700 AM, then 1000 AM. If you're expecting a giant sea monster to emerge from the water, you will be disappointed. For the next 6 grueling hours on our virtual clock, equivalent to about 1 billion years of actual history, life virtually stood still. This era lasted a terrifyingly long time. The planet's only protagonists were single-celled bacteria invisible to the human eye. They floated aimlessly, clinging to dark rock crevices, eating chemical compounds to survive, and were constantly wiped out by meteorite collisions or extreme temperature changes. They were too small, too fragile, Earth seemed capable of ending this biological experiment at any moment with a single sigh of nature. But life is more resilient than we imagine, and evolution never stops searching for opportunities. The clock strikes 100 p.m. That is 100 in the afternoon. The sun is shining its harshest rays down onto the ocean's surface. At this moment, a branch of bacteria decided to carry out the boldest revolution in biological history. Instead of hiding in the deep sea and eating scavenged chemicals, they decided to swim to the surface waters. Scientists call them blue, green algae, or cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria invented an unprecedented biological machine, photosynthesis. They use their green chlorophyll to absorb sunlight directly, breaking down water molecules and carbon dioxide gas, thereby manufacturing sugar for food. This ability to create energy from nothing turned cyanobacteria into absolute rulers. They multiplied at a dizzying speed, carpeting the surface of the primordial oceans with giant microbial mats. However, there was one deadly detail in this great invention. Like every industrial plant, the process of photosynthesis also produced waste, and the waste that cyanobacteria discharged directly into the ocean environment at that time, ironically, was exactly what we breathe every day. Oxygen. Remember, for all living organisms on Earth before 100 p.m., oxygen was a worthless thing. No worse than that. It was a highly toxic substance. It was a highly reactive gas, a brutal acid capable of tearing through cell membranes, destroying DNA, and incinerating anaerobic bacteria on contact. As cyanobacteria populations exploded, they pumped billions of tons of oxygen into the ocean. A global-scale massacre began. Wherever oxygen spread, primordial anaerobic life was destroyed. Throughout the oceans, huge amounts of iron dissolved in seawater began to react with oxygen. The iron rusted. Billions of tons of deep red iron oxide precipitated and sank to the seabed, dyeing the entire ocean into a giant pot of rusty soup. It took hundreds of millions of years later, when all the iron in the ocean had been oxidized for the excess oxygen, to begin bubbling up and flooding into the atmosphere. The world changed forever. The sky gradually turned from a toxic orange to a beautiful pale blue. Yet, the price for that blue sky was extremely high. Geologists call this the Great Oxygenation Event. For the first time in history, it wasn't a meteorite or a volcano, but life itself that triggered a horrific mass extinction, slaughtering its own kind on a planetary scale. And the consequences of the oxygen catastrophe didn't stop there. It sparked the most severe climate tragedy in history. When oxygen flooded the atmosphere, it immediately reacted with and destroyed methane, the powerful greenhouse gas that was helping to keep Earth warm. Like a greenhouse with every window, smashed in the middle of a freezing winter. When the methane blanket was torn apart, Earth's temperature plummeted uncontrollably. The clock strikes 200 p.m. Sunlight still shines, but there is no heat. Global temperatures dropped to -50°C. Huge, pure white ice sheets began to form at the poles and crawled toward the equator. The white ice reflected sunlight back into space, making the Earth colder and colder. An unstoppable loop of doom. Very quickly, all the oceans were frozen solid under a layer of ice kilometers thick. Even the hottest equatorial regions were submerged in perpetual blizzards. Looking down from space, Earth was no longer a fireball, nor was it a blue sphere. It had turned into Snowball Earth, a brilliant white, silent, and deadly icy prison drifting soullessly through the solar system. The young life that had just burst forth was immediately frozen, trapped under thousands of meters of ice in absolute darkness. All hope seemed to have been extinguished. Yet, with an unbelievable tenacity, deep beneath the cracked ice around the rare and faintly active volcanic vents, tiny seeds of life were still huddling together, warming each other, patiently waiting for the next miracle of rescue from Mother Earth. The game of survival has only gone on for over half a day, and the most horrific events are still waiting ahead. The great Snowball Earth drifted aimlessly through space. Our Earth at this time was like a giant icy tomb locked in a harsh, seemingly eternal winter. The entire planet was encased in a layer of ice, so thick that sunlight could not penetrate to the oceans below. Young life, having just blossomed, was now pushed to the brink, huddling around rare, remaining underwater volcanic vents in the deep sea, struggling to cling to every meager bit of heat from Earth's core. But, this planet has never succumbed to the silence. Even when completely frozen over, the fiery magma heartbeat within Earth's core still beat with furious pulses. The immense pressure building up beneath the rigid rock crust finally found a way to be released. A series of supervolcanoes awakened simultaneously, roaring as they tore through kilometers of thick ice. They didn't just erupt fiery, red lava onto the stark white surface, but more importantly, they released billions of tons of carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. This time, there were no rains or open oceans to absorb this massive amount of greenhouse gas. Carbon dioxide built up into a thick blanket, trapping heat from the sun and locking it onto Earth. The extreme greenhouse effect began to exert its magical power. Global temperatures gradually crept up. The eternal ice began to crack and melt. Liquid water once again flooded the planet. The Snowball was rescued. Our time clock passed 200 p.m., then 300 p.m., 500 p.m., 700 p.m. The sun on the virtual clock was gradually setting below the horizon, casting long shadows that enveloped the planet. Dear audience, we are entering an era that geologists often jokingly call the boring billion. The reason for this name is that for nearly 7 long hours on our scale, equivalent to more than 1 billion years in reality, Earth's surface seemed frozen in a state of absolute equilibrium. The climate was strangely stable. The supercontinents drifted together and then stood still. The oceans were calm, gray and oxygen-poor. There were no asteroid disasters, no ice ages, and no large creatures appeared to break this melancholy silence. But don't let the peace on the surface fool you. Nature was not sleeping. Right beneath those gentle waves, the greatest revolution in biological history was silently taking place on a scale so small that the naked eye could not see it. At some random moment in the vast ocean, a giant predatory bacterial cell swam over and devoured a smaller bacterium. Normally, that tiny enemy would have been digested and turned into energy. However, a miraculous system error occurred. The small bacterium did not die. Instead, it continued to live inside the predator's body. The swallowed one possessed a superpower that the hunter craved: the ability to use oxygen to generate massive energy. These two tiny organisms reached an eternal pact. The large one provided safe shelter and food, while the small one acted as a tireless, non-stop power plant. That tiny bacterium, over time, evolved and became mitochondria, an indispensable organelle in every complex cell today. This great merger is scientifically known as the endosymbiotic theory. It gave birth to eukaryotes. Every animal, plant, fungus, and even we humans ourselves are direct descendants of this random but fortunate devouring. Without that great cooperation, Earth would forever be just a mud puddle filled with simple bacteria. The clock strikes 8:30 p.m. The night sky begins to descend, covering the expanse. There are only 3.12 hours left until the end of the day, and Earth's billions of years of patience are finally rewarded. At the bottom of warm, shallow seas, life finally transcended microscopic limits. Single cells began to cluster, sticking together, dividing labor, and forming the first multicellular organisms. The Ediacaran period officially commences. If you were to dive into the Ediacara garden back then, you would think you were lost on some distant planet rather than Earth. There were no fish, no coral, no algae here. Instead, there were the most bizarre biological forms to ever exist. Some creatures looked like giant fern leaves, firmly planted in the mud, swaying with the ocean currents. Some species looked like overlain mattresses bobbing on the sand. They were soft, had no bones, no hard shells, no heads, no eyes, and didn't even have a mouth or digestive system. They just lay there in absolute stillness, directly absorbing nutrients dissolved in the seawater through their fragile skin. The Garden of Ediacara was a world of absolute serenity, an era without biological crime. There were no brutal predators, nor were there fearful prey hiding away. No claws, no teeth, no bloodshed. Everything just floated and existed in a gentle dance under the dim moonlight filtering through the water. But this peace did not last long. The darkness of night was falling. Life was about to discover the most cruel weapon, but also the greatest evolutionary driver of all time: predation. The minute hand of the clock is ticking toward the 900 p.m. mark. Violence is about to begin. The darkness of night begins to fall upon our virtual clock face. But deep beneath the silent oceans of the Ediacaran period, a weapon, the most terrifying, the most brutal, but also the greatest in evolutionary history, was beginning to take shape. That was the mouth, and along with it, a complete digestive system. Think back for a moment. For billions of years, life on Earth was incredibly innocent and passive. Creatures only knew how to lie flat on the muddy floor, swaying with the ocean currents, and slowly absorbing nutrients through their cell membranes. That serenity, the perfect and silent balance, shattered forever when an anonymous mutant creature realized a cruel truth of nature. Why struggle to pick up meager scraps of energy floating in the water, when you can seize that entire massive block of energy by tearing apart and devouring someone else? The act of predation was officially born. It tore apart the eternal peace treaty of the Garden of Ediacara, turning the ocean from a quiet paradise into a bloody arena. The velvet curtain of innocence has closed. The most fierce biological arms race of all time has officially begun. The clock strikes 9:04 p.m. Only a few short minutes passed on our macroscopic scale, but it was a moment that paleontologists must bow to in awe and name the Big Bang of life, the Cambrian explosion. Like a nuclear reactor spinning out of control, biodiversity exploded at an insane speed and with unprecedented chaos. To survive in a world suddenly full of hungry enemies, gentle creatures were forced to evolve or accept death. They began extracting calcium carbonate dissolved in seawater to cast for themselves hard armored shells. They grew rows of sharp spikes protruding all around their bodies to pierce through enemies. They developed complex jointed legs to crawl faster and hydrodynamic tail fins to swim with more maneuverability. But the greatest invention of the Cambrian period was not fangs or claws. It was eyes. Before the Cambrian, the world was completely blind. But now, photosensitive cells have converged. For the first time on this planet, sunlight piercing through the water did not just bring heat or photosynthetic energy. It brought information. The ability to see enemies from a distance and the ability to lock on to prey with binocular vision completely changed the rules of the survival game. The creature that saw first survived. The creature that was blind was eliminated. And stepping out from the light of that visual evolution, the ocean's first brutal king, the most primitive ultimate predator, has been revealed. Call its name with awe: Anomalocaris. If you were a tiny trilobite diligently digging in the mud on the seabead, Anomalocaris was the Grim Reaper. Imagine a monster up to a meter long, a size so absurdly giant compared to the creatures that were only a few millimeters long at that time. It glided through the calm water silently, with 2 rows of undulating fins along its sides, just like a biological stealth submarine. On its head, Large, bulging, compound eyes, composed of thousands of tiny lenses, swiveled constantly, scanning the seed with a cold gaze. Once it locked onto its target, it accelerated. At the front of its mouth, two giant tentacles bristling with sharp spikes grasped the prey tightly, lifting the victim off the mud. The trilobite's armor was crushed and fed directly into a round mouth, bristling with dozens of razor-sharp conical teeth functioning, exactly like a camera lens tightening shut. The animal kingdom had its first emperor, and his crown was forged from cruelty. However, the great game of life could not be imprisoned under the salt water forever. The clock hand moves to 9:52 p.m. The atmosphere at this time had undergone a silent but decisive transformation. Thanks to the tireless efforts of cyanobacteria and marine algae over billions of years, the amount of oxygen pumped into the air had reached sufficient concentration. Under the impact of ultraviolet rays from the sun, oxygen molecules in the stratosphere were torn apart and recombined into ozone. The planet's greatest invisible shield was complete. It enveloped the Earth, repelling deadly ultraviolet radiation, turning the vast arid land, which had been a scorched wasteland for 4 billion years, into a promised land of absolute safety. The landing began, first with the silent armies. Layers of moss, ancient fungi, and primitive ferns timidly crawled ashore. Their roots secreted acid, breaking down solid rock, decomposing minerals, and creating the miracle called soil. For the first time since its birth, Earth was clothed in a green cloak full of vitality. And wherever there is food, there will be hunters. Following in the footsteps of flora, the bravest creatures began to leave the safety of the ocean. Arthropods led the way. The ancestors of scorpions, spiders, and centipedes stepped out of the water, bringing along chitinous armor to retain moisture and a completely new respiratory system to breathe the air. Not long after, our ancestors, lobe-finned fish like Tiktaalik, also used their bare, muscular fins to crawl through muddy swamps, struggling to stretch their necks and gulp their first breath of air. Life had conquered the entire planet. 10:30 p.m. Welcome to the Carboniferous period, the era of giant nightmares. Earth at this time looked exactly like the setting of a sci-fi horror movie. Everywhere across the surface of the supercontinents was covered by dense, humid, and dark primeval tropical swamp forests. Ancient ferns and scale trees reached straight into the sky, soaring up to 30 feet high, forming a canopy that completely blocked out the sunlight. But the strangest thing lay in the atmosphere. During the Carboniferous, nature had not yet invented bacteria capable of decomposing wood. As a result, when billions of ancient giant trees fell, they did not rot. They piled on top of each other, buried under layers of mud, taking all the sequestered carbon permanently underground. Excessive photosynthesis pushed atmospheric oxygen levels to surge to 35%. A potent dose of doping for the animal kingdom, especially for insects, creatures that breathe through spiracles along their bodies. The higher the atmospheric oxygen levels, the more they shattered all size limits. Under that stifling forest canopy, if you hear a deafening flapping of wings, duck down immediately. A terror of the Carboniferous sky has just glided over your head. That is Meganura, a giant predatory dragonfly the size of a hawk with a wingspan of nearly 1 mm. They tear through the wind, diving at terrifying speeds, using their spine-covered legs to snatch prey right out of midair. On the ground, the true nightmares are crawling. A jet black armored monster, over 2 and 1x2 meb long and 1.22 ebon wide, slithers out from the swamp mist. That is Arthropleura, the largest giant millipede species to ever exist. The rapid crunching sound of dozens of pairs of legs clawing over rotting wood signals the presence of an unstoppable meat-grinding machine. Humans, with our small bodies, if transported back here, would be nothing more than appetizers for the aggressive bugs crawling everywhere. But the bizarre prosperity of the Carboniferous could not last. Nature decided to press the delete button on all life on a planetary scale. The clock strikes 2:40 p.m. We are about to witness the bloodiest event in the 4.5 billion years of the Earth's existence, the Great Dying, the Permian mass extinction. The culprit was hiding right beneath the ground, where the creature stood. In the Siberian region of Russia, a supersystem of Earth's crustal rifts was torn open. A sea of mantle magma, spanning millions of square kilometers, began to surge toward the surface. It erupted relentlessly for a full million years. The amount of molten rock poured out was enough to bury the entire United States under a layer of rock over 1 km thick. But lava only killed the creatures nearby. As billions of tons of magma rose, it cooked the massive coal deposits buried underground. Trillions of tons of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide gas were blasted straight into the atmosphere. An extreme greenhouse effect was triggered. Global temperatures spiked vertically. Ocean waters heated up to the point of nearly boiling, reaching 40 degrees C at the equator. The global ocean became a stagnant pool drowning from a lack of oxygen. Anaerobic bacteria producing hydrogen sulfide gas exploded in population, tinting all the oceans a deadly pinkish purple. Toxic gas bubbled up, surging to the surface, poisoning any creature breathing onshore and rising to corrode the entire ozone layer. Ultraviolet rays from the sun hammered straight down onto the ground mercilessly. The atmosphere was a thick soup of ash and dust pouring down intense sulfuric acid rain that corroded bark and dissolved the very marrow of animals. A perfect domino chain of doom. 96% of marine species were wiped out without a trace. 70% of terrestrial vertebrates collapsed completely. The oceans were piled high with rotting carcasses. Animals suffocated, burned, starved, and died of poisoning. A grand symphony of destruction clearing away all evolutionary heritage. Earth seemed to have taken its last breath, thrown back to the starting line with the soulless silence of a graveyard submerged in cold darkness. However, somewhere beneath the still smoldering layers of ash, a few small mammal-like reptiles patiently survived. They had no idea that this very brutal extinction wiped out all rivals, creating massive ecological gaps for their descendants to rise and build the greatest empire, the dinosaur tyrants. The clock strikes 2:40 p.m. The night is late. The atmosphere on Earth at this moment is an eerie silence. After the brutal wrath of the Siberian supervolcano, our planet was left as nothing but a cold heap of ash. 96% of life was wiped out. The supercontinents were cracked, desolate, and drenched in the smell of sulfur and corpses. Life seemed to have been completely knocked down. But if there is one lesson that nature has repeated for billions of years, it is this: life always finds a way. Despite every disaster, despite the most desperate odds, the flame of life still flickered beneath the layers of ash. As greenhouse gases gradually settled, the sky cleared again and sweet rains washed away the toxins on the ground. Massive ecological gaps began to open up. Tiny, resilient creatures that once had to huddle in deep burrows have now emerged onto the surface. Among them was a group of reptiles called archosaurs. Taking advantage of the absence of their giant predator predecessors, they began to evolve at a breakneck speed. Branching out, growing larger, and changing their pelvic structure to stand upright on two legs. And then the clock hand moved to 10:56 p.m. Nearly 1100 p.m., the stage was cleared. The stands were ready, and the true kings of Earth officially stepped into the light. Welcome to the Mesozoic era, also known as the Age of Dinosaurs. For the next hour and a half on our 24-hour scale, equivalent to about 160 million long years of actual history, Earth belonged completely, absolutely, and unconditionally to them. Never before had there been a generation of creatures, nor will there ever be one again, including humans, who could dominate this planet with such mythical authority, diversity, and sheer size as the dinosaurs. Imagine you are standing on a flooded plain of the Jurassic period. The ground beneath your feet begins to vibrate rhythmically. Thump, thump. A dull sound echoes from afar like the war drums of nature. You look up, and obscuring a corner of the sky is a herd of sauropods, the most colossal plant digesting machines to ever walk the earth. Look at Argentinosaurus, a giant creature as long as 3 buses lined up, weighing nearly 100 tons. Its massive neck reaches 15 meters into the air, easily tearing through the canopy of ancient coniferous trees. Its heart must have been the size of a car, beating powerfully to pump thousands of liters of blood up that long neck. When a herd of Argentinosaurus moved, they were like walking mountains, flattening everything in their path and plowing the ground into small canyons. But the empire of the lizards was not confined just to the plains. Look up at the sky. Giant shadows glide past, obscuring even the moonlight. Those are not birds. They are pterosaurs, winged thunder lizards. The great Quetzalcoatlus, with wingspans of up to 11 m, as large as a modern U.S. Air Force F-16 fighter jet. They didn't flap their wings like small birds. Instead, they rode on rising thermal currents, soaring thousands of kilometers across vast oceans, using their spectacular long beaks to scoop up large fish right off the surface of the waves. And beneath the deep sea waters, true horror reigned. No sea was safe during this era. Plesiosaurs with necks as long as pythons, weaving through coral reefs to hunt prey. And the most ferocious of all was the mosasaur, killing machines 15-membered long, with jaws that could expand enough to swallow a modern great white shark in a single bite. They turned the Cretaceous oceans into a literal bloodbath, where the strongest was the one with the largest teeth. However, the supreme symbol of power, the pinnacle of terrestrial killing art, the emperor of all emperors, only appeared in the final minutes of the Cretaceous period. About 68 million years ago, an ear-splitting roar tore through the dense coniferous forest. The ground trembled violently under the footsteps of the tyrant. Tyrannosaurus rex has stepped out of the brush. No words can describe the deadly perfection of this biological machine. 12-membered long, 4.5-membered tall, and weighing 8 tons. T-Rex did not hunt with finesse. It hunted with pure violence. It possessed the strongest bite force ever recorded among land animals. A pressure of up to tens of thousands of newtons. Its jaws were equipped with 60 thick serrated teeth, the size of bananas, designed not to tear flesh, but to crush bone and marrow. When T-Rex locked its jaws onto its prey, it didn't just take a life. It shattered the victim's skeletal structure into tiny fragments. For millions of years, T-Rex was the embodiment of invincibility. It stood at the very top of the food chain, looking down on all things with the pride of a creature without natural enemies. But every pride must eventually pay the price before the ruthlessness of the universe. The clock of time coldly strikes, 11:39 p.m. Only 21 minutes remain until the end of the planet's 24 hours. It was a perfectly normal late afternoon at the end of the Cretaceous period, 66 million years ago. Across North America's Yucatan Peninsula, herds of triceratops were slowly chewing ferns. The T-Rex is sniffing around, searching for prey under the pale sunlight. The sky remains a deep, vast blue, but against that peaceful blue background, a tiny point of light suddenly appears. At first, it looked just like a star twinkling in the middle of the day. But that star did not stay still. It grew larger, grew larger. From a dazzling point of light, it transformed into a rolling fireball, trailing a colossal brilliant tail of smoke that obscured the sun. It was a giant asteroid, 10 kilometers in diameter, a massive rock larger than Mount Everest hurtling from deep space toward Earth at a destructive speed. 70,000 km, 60 times faster than the speed of sound. In those final moments, curious dinosaurs looked up toward the sky. Their eyes reflected the blinding light of the apocalypse. They did not know to flee. They had no concept of death coming from the sky. They just stood there staring vacantly as the stone god of death descended upon the world. And then, the moment of destiny struck. The asteroid pierced through the atmosphere in less than 2 seconds. It tore through the air so quickly that it created a vacuum tunnel in its wake, compressing the air in front with horrific pressure, causing the air to ignite into a mass of superheated plasma. It plunged straight into the shallow waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The impact was not merely a strike against the ground. With massive kinetic energy, the asteroid pierced the Earth's crust, gouging a crater 150 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers deep, shoving a portion of the planet's crust deep into the mantle below. The energy released was beyond belief, 100 million megatons. This destructive force was billions of times stronger than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, equivalent to detonating the entire global nuclear arsenal at once and multiplying it by 10,000. In the very first millisecond, a flash brighter than 1,000 suns erupted. Colossal thermal radiation swept through at the speed of light, instantly incinerating every living thing, every tree, and every animal within a 500 kilometers radius into atomic dust before their nervous systems could even register the pain. T-Rex, Triceratops, or any creature standing nearby simply vaporized out of existence. In the next second, the wall of compressed air rebounded into a massive shock wave. A gale moving at thousands of kilometers per hour, stronger than any super hurricane that ever existed, tore across the surface of the North American continent. Wherever this shock wave traveled, trees were uprooted and shredded like straws, and animals were flung into the air like broken toys. The earth and sky shook with terrifying earthquakes, measuring up to 11 on the Richter scale, tearing the ground apart and triggering all the planet's volcanoes to erupt simultaneously. But that was only on land. In the ocean, the impact tossed a colossal volume of water into the air. When that mass of water collapsed, it created a massive tsunami hundreds of meters high. A murky wall of water carrying earth, rocks, and the remains of the dead moved at the speed of a jet, sweeping hundreds of kilometers inland, crushing everything beneath its billion-ton weight. The coastlines of the continents were completely reshaped in just minutes. Yet, the coldest killer of that day actually came from the sky itself. When the asteroid struck, the terrifying energy melted and vaporized billions of tons of sedimentary rock from the Earth's crust, ejecting it back into space. This massive volume of material was flung out of the atmosphere, cooling rapidly in the vacuum of space, turning into countless glowing glass spherules. And then, the planet's gravity pulled them back down. Earth endured the most brutal meteor shower in history. Trillions of superheated glass stones hurtled down, friction with the atmosphere turning the entire sky surrounding the globe into a glowing red giant oven. Global air temperatures skyrocketed to hundreds of degrees Celsius. Jungles across every continent spontaneously erupted into flames. The entire surface of the planet was submerged in an ocean of blazing fire. The dinosaurs that survived the initial impact now faced a slower and more horrific death. Where could they flee when the sky was raining fire and the air was boiling their lungs? A few days after the impact, the fires gradually died out. Billions of tons of ash and soot from the incinerated forests, along with sulfur gas rising from the impact crater, spread and completely enveloped the entire globe. A thick, pitch black shroud completely blocked out the sunlight. Earth was plunged into an inky, absolute darkness. Nuclear winter began. Global temperatures plummeted and the oceans began to freeze. Without light, Photosynthesis across the globe ceased entirely. Plants withered and rotted. The great food chain was severed at its roots. The giant herbivorous dinosaurs had no leaves left to chew, gradually collapsing from starvation. And giant prey disappeared. Carnivorous tyrants like the T-Rex entered their most desperate days. They roared pitifully, tearing at each other in the cold darkness to fight over the last rotting carcasses, before they too grew weak and collapsed onto the filthy snow. In just a blink of an eye in cosmic history, the greatest empire ever built collapsed into ruins. The crown of the lizards fell into the mud, 160 million years of majestic reign wiped out by just a stray rock. 99% of all dinosaur species went extinct, leaving behind a desolate, silent, and deadly world. But once again, the ruthless and miraculous laws of nature were at work. As the giant tyrants fell, the small ones hiding deep in earthen burrows began to raise their heads. The clock of time has only 20 minutes left. The night is nearly over. The dawn of a new era is about to break. An era of intellect, of fur and warm milk. The era of our very own kind is beginning. The clock strikes 11:39 p.m. The night of the apocalypse envelops the globe. After the giant rock from space crashed into the Gulf of Mexico, Earth was no longer a green planet, nor was it a ball of fire. It had turned into a gray grave, silent and cold. Dust, volcanic ash, and soot from billions of burnt trees formed a thick black veil surrounding the entire stratosphere. Sunlight, the energy that has nourished all things for billions of years, was absolutely denied. Entering a long, drawn-out nuclear winter, the Earth's surface was a picture of despair. Everywhere were the giant skeletons of the dinosaur empire, being eroded by time and frost. But look closely beneath that filthy layer of ash. There, in tiny, damp burrows deep under rotting tree roots, small lives were trembling but resiliently holding on. They were creatures resembling today's shrews. They were mammals. They were our most distant ancestors. Why did they survive while giant tyrants like the T-Rex fell? The answer lies in humility. These small creatures did not need hundreds of kilograms of meat every day to survive. They ate insects, worms, and crickets, seeds fallen beneath the ash, and even scavenged rotting scraps from the carcasses of the great dinosaurs themselves. Furthermore, they possessed a superpower that reptiles lacked: warm blood and insulating fur. When the Earth was plunged into ice, they generated internal body heat to keep themselves warm. And when food sources were depleted, mothers did not abandon their children. They secreted a white liquid rich in nutrients and antibodies from their own bodies to nourish the next generation. Breast milk. That primal motherly love saved our entire lineage from extinction. And then, thousands of years passed. The dust in the sky finally settled. The first weak rays of sunlight pierced through the gray clouds, shining upon the desolate ground. A new dawn truly began. 11:45 p.m. With the dinosaurs completely wiped out, the land, sky, and oceans were left wide open. Massive ecological gaps were waiting for new kings to fill them. And mammals, from timid little creatures, began to step out of the dark caves, rising up in the most spectacular evolutionary explosion in history. Across the continents, biodiversity poured forth like a waterfall. Jungles grew, greener and more vibrant with the appearance of flowers and sweet fruits. In just a short time on the clock, mammals began to break all size limits. Some species decided to return to the ocean, transforming their legs into fins, developing thick layers of fat to resist the deep-sea cold, and becoming giant whales ruling the blue wave kingdom. On land, giant hornless rhinoceroses, Parasauritherium, stretched their spectacular long necks up to 5 men high to eat leaves. Herds of woolly mammoths trudged across the frozen tundras. Smilodons, saber-toothed tigers, with sharp curved fangs up to 20 centimeters long, lurked in the bushes, ready to launch a deadly pounce. Earth was once again overflowing with the sap of life. But turn your gaze toward the African continent. There, upon the towering canopies of the primary rainforests, a small branch of mammals was honing an invaluable skill, the ability to grasp with hands, featuring opposable thumbs and sharp eyes that could perceive three-dimensional space. They were the first primates. The clock hand moves toward 11:58 p.m. There are less than 2 minutes left until the end of the day. At this moment, Mother Nature changed the rules of the game once again. Tectonic plates collided violently, pushing giant mountains upward to block moist air currents. The global climate became colder and drier. In East Africa, the dense forests that sheltered primates gradually shrank, withered, and gave way to the vast, sun-scorched and open savanna grasslands. Our ancestors, creatures accustomed to living in the safety of high trees, were now pushed into a desperate situation. With no more trees to hide in and no more sweet fruit to pluck, they were forced to do something unprecedented: descend to the ground. Standing in the middle of a vast wilderness, with grass over their heads, surrounded by brutal predators that were many times faster, stronger, and larger. That wretched creature had no claws to tear flesh, no fangs to bite back, no armored shell for defense, and its running speed was pathetic. According to every theory of evolution, this weak creature should have gone extinct immediately. It was the most perfect prey. But instead of collapsing, it performed the greatest act in the entire history of evolution. It used its two hind legs to stand upright. Standing upright freed the hands from the task of moving, and those hands, combined with a brain that was increasingly expanding from having to constantly solve harsh survival problems, created a kind of magic that reshaped the whole world. Tools. A broken branch turned into a spear. A sharply flaked pebble turned into a butchering knife. And then, on a cold, stormy night, a branch of our ancestors, Homo erectus, accidentally or intentionally brought a burning fire from a lightning-struck tree back to their cave. 11:59 p.m., exactly 1 minute left. The flickering fire in the cave did more than just dispel the darkness and wild beasts. Fire cooked the food. Cooked meat was easier to digest, providing a massive and surplus amount of calories. That energy was channeled directly into nourishing a single organ: the brain. Intelligence exploded. For the first time, the meaningless sounds of beasts turned into language. For the first time, instead of just fearing the night, these upright standing creatures knew how to sit around the fire, share food, and tell each other imaginary stories. The concepts of family, tribe, and culture officially began to spark. The clock strikes 11:59 and 58 seconds p.m., only 2 seconds left until midnight. This is our moment. Homo sapiens officially appears on the scene. Enduring brutal ice ages, where temperatures froze even the oceans, human tribes resiliently crossed great land bridges, connecting continents, migrated out of Africa, and spread to every corner of the globe. With cunning intelligence, unparalleled unity, and deadly weapons, the creature that was once the weakest prey on the grasslands had now climbed to the absolute top of the food chain. Every giant beast in the way, from mammoths to saber-toothed tigers, and even close relatives like the Neanderthals, were pushed into the darkness of extinction by humans, one by one. And now, hold your breath. The clock shows only the final 50/10 of a second. Imagine 50/10 of a second, literally the blink of an eye. In that crazy and miraculous instant, everything you know about the word history officially erupts. Humans threw away stone spears and began planting seeds in the ground. Agriculture was born. Small thatched huts quickly expanded into villages, then bustling towns. Language was carved into clay tablets, giving birth to writing. Great civilizations rose along major rivers. Egypt, with its towering pyramids defying time. Babylon, with its vibrant hanging gardens. the proud Roman Empire with its legionaries conquering across Europe. Qin Shi Huang built the Great Wall with blood and bones. Everything accelerated at a dizzying pace, blurred like a film reel being fast, forwarded millions of times. Clashing swords gave way to the roar of gunpowder. Sails full of wind gave way to steam engines billowing black smoke. Flickering candlelight was extinguished by the brilliant light of blinding electricity. The world was submerged in a sea of blood from the two most brutal world wars in history, where humans tore each other apart with artillery shells and nuclear bombs. And then, in the most fragile instant of the day, the terrifying roar of a jet engine sounded. Humans escaped Earth's gravity. Neil Armstrong took the first step on the dusty surface of the moon. Computers were born. The internet connected billions of brains together through fiber optic cables lying silent under the ocean floor. Artificial satellites filled the sky. Artificial intelligence awakened, and unmanned spacecraft are coldly crossing the boundaries of the solar system, carrying our greetings into the infinite void. All of that massive legacy, every tear, every smile, every love song, every great invention, and every most brutal human crime, all encapsulated in less than the final 0.2 seconds of the clock. The ticking stops. Exactly 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. 24 hours have passed. We have reached the end of the day. The journey through 4.5 billion years across hellish seas of fire. Desolate snowballs, explosions of life, and the most brutal destructive disasters has finally stopped at the present moment. Right at this very moment as you sit here, breathing the air of the 21st century. Looking back at that great panoramic picture, perhaps within each of us rises a feeling of being overwhelmed and utterly small. We often beat our chests and claim to be the lords of all species, the center of the universe. But on the ruthless scale of geological time, humanity has only appeared for a few heartbeats. Our existence is as fragile as a speck of dust floating in an afternoon sunbeam. This Earth lived very well before us, went through 5 terrifying mass extinctions, demolished and rebuilt its ecosystem countless times, and it will continue to rotate steadily in the silent universe, even if humans are no longer present. However, that smallness does not mean we are meaningless. No creature in the past 24 hours, including the largest tyrannosaurs or the craziest supervolcanoes, has possessed the power to change the face of the planet with such terrifying speed as humans. In a mere tenth of that second, we have bent rivers, leveled mountains, drained the earth to burn the remains of the Carboniferous period, and changed the chemical composition of the atmosphere. We have become a true force of nature, a man-made asteroid hurtling toward itself. The biggest question now is not where we came from, but where we will go in the earth tomorrow. Can humans, with their intelligence and pride, overcome the disasters created by their own hands? Will we be wise enough to protect this fragile blue home? Or will we just be a thin layer of fossils filled with plastic and radioactive waste waiting to be excavated by some intelligent species in a few billion years? The clock of the new day has begun to count down its first seconds. The future of the planet is not written in stone, but is being written by our very choices today. Thank you for accompanying me to the end of this epic chronicle. A long, tiring trip, but hopefully it has brought you truly overwhelming perspectives on where we live. Which moment made you feel most amazed, shivered, or moved? Please leave your thoughts in the comments section. I would love to read your feelings. If you love these intellectual and macro journeys like this, don't forget to like, share the video with friends, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to explore other great mysteries of the universe in the next videos. See you in the upcoming journeys. Wishing you a new day, a new time cycle full of meaning.